The war drums had fallen silent 3 days ahead of schedule. King Drakmor the Terrible, sovereign of the Eastern Flame territories, spread his massive wings as he soared over the jagged peaks that protected his mountain fortress. His scales, black as the void between stars, rippled with the satisfaction of another decisive victory. The rebel clans of the northern wastes had surrendered faster than expected, their crude weapons no match for his legion of dragon warriors. As he approached his castle, something seemed different. The usual silence that greeted his domain was broken by sounds he couldn't identify. Voices carried on the wind, and not the terrified whispers of servants scurrying to avoid his wrath. These were cheerful sounds, laughter even. Drakmor's golden eyes narrowed. In his 300-year reign, laughter had never echoed through these halls unless it was his own, usually following the destruction of enemies. His claws scraped against the stone landing platform as he settled his massive form, steam rising from his nostrils in confusion. The great doors to his throne room stood open, which was the first shock. They were never opened without his direct command. As he approached, the sounds grew clearer, and what he heard made his ancient heart skip a beat. Children's voices, human children, giggling and chattering in their strange, melodic language. Drakmor had purchased his human maid, Ilara, from a slave trader 2 years ago. She was different from the trembling servants he usually kept, showing no fear despite his fearsome reputation. She cleaned efficiently, spoke only when necessary, and asked for nothing. The perfect servant, really. He'd paid handsomely for her because humans were rare this far into dragon territory, and their unique skills made them valuable. But children? There should be no children anywhere near his domain. He peered around the massive door frame, his enormous form hidden in shadow, and his jaw nearly dropped. His throne room had been transformed into something unrecognizable. Where once stood his imposing throne of black stone and bones, now sat cushions and blankets arranged in circles. Human children, at least 20 of them, sat in groups while Ilara moved between them with bowls of food. But these weren't just any children. Drakmor's keen eyes picked out details that chilled him. Burn scars covered visible skin on several of the youngsters. Others bore the unmistakable marks of malnutrition. Their arms too thin, their eyes too large for their faces. A few wore tattered clothing that suggested they'd been living rough for some time. These were war orphans, human casualties from the very conflict he'd just finished winning. "Now, who can tell me what we learned about reading yesterday?" Ilara asked in the human common tongue, her voice gentle and warm. A small girl with bandaged arms raised her hand eagerly. "That letters make words, and words make stories." "Exactly right, Mira." Ilara smiled and ruffled the child's hair. "And what did we discover about stories?" An older boy, maybe 12 cycles old, spoke up. "That even sad stories can have good parts, and that reading them helps us understand things." Drakmor's talons scraped unconsciously against the stone floor. Ilara was teaching them to read. But that wasn't the most shocking part. "Miss Ilara," called out a younger boy, "when will the Dragon King come back? Will he be angry with us?" The room fell silent, and Drakmor held his breath. Every child's face showed fear now, their small bodies tensing as if ready to flee. Ilara knelt beside the boy, her expression serious but kind. "King Drakmor is a powerful ruler who has many responsibilities. When he returns, I will speak with him. But remember what we talked about yesterday? That you'll protect us," whispered a girl with bandaged feet. "That's right. I made you all a promise, and I keep my promises. No matter what happens, you are safe here. Do you trust me?" A chorus of small voices replied, "Yes, Miss Ilara." Drakmor's mind reeled. She had promised to protect them? From him? His own servant had filled his castle with enemy children and promised to stand between them and his wrath. "Now," Elara continued, "let's practice our letters. But first, who's still hungry?" Almost every small hand shot up, and Elara laughed, the sound filling the vast chamber. "I thought so. Growing minds need good food." She disappeared through a side door, returning moments later with more bowls of what appeared to be a hearty stew, along with bread that smelled fresh from the ovens. Drakmor realized she must have been using his kitchens, commanding his staff to prepare food for these children. The audacity was breathtaking. And yet, he watched as she served each child personally, making sure the smaller ones got extra portions, checking that the injured ones could manage their food, speaking quietly to each in words of encouragement. When one little girl began crying, Elara immediately knelt beside her, pulling the child into a gentle embrace. "What's wrong, sweet one?" "I miss my mama," the girl sobbed into Alara's shoulder. "I know, Kenna. I miss people too. It's okay to be sad, but you know what your mama would want for you?" The girl pulled back, wiping her nose. "What?" "She'd want you to learn and grow strong and be brave. And she'd want you to eat your vegetables." Elara pointed to the girl's barely touched bowl with a smile. This earned a small giggle. "Mama always said that too." "Smart mama. Now can you try a few more bites for her?" As the girl nodded and picked up her spoon, Drakmor noticed something that made his chest tighten strangely. Several of the other children had gathered closer, as if drawn to the warmth of the interaction. They weren't just eating the food Elara provided. They were watching her, learning from her responses, mimicking her gentle way of speaking to each other. She wasn't just feeding them and teaching them letters. She was showing them how to be human in the face of tremendous loss. "Miss Elara," asked an older girl with intelligent eyes, "why are you helping us? We're nobody important." Elara set down the serving bowls and looked around the circle of young faces. When she spoke, her voice carried a conviction that resonated through the stone chamber. "You are not nobody. Every single one of you is someone's most precious treasure. Maybe that someone isn't here anymore, but that doesn't change your worth. You have minds that can learn amazing things. You have hearts that can feel joy and love and hope. You have hands that can build and create and help others someday." She paused, making eye contact with each child. "And right now, you have each other. That makes you very important indeed." "But we don't have anywhere to go after here," said the older boy, his voice heavy with worry. "The war destroyed our villages. Our families are gone." "Then we'll figure out what comes next together," Elara replied firmly. "For now, you're here, you're safe, you're learning, and you're not alone. That's enough for today." Drakmor felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. In all his centuries of existence, he had never seen anything like this. He had conquered territories, commanded armies, struck fear into the hearts of enemies across the continent. But this human woman had done something he had never thought possible. She had brought hope into his fortress of despair. "Now," Elara announced, "let's see how those reading lessons are coming along. Who wants to try reading from the story scroll?" Hands shot up eagerly, and Drakmor found himself leaning forward to listen as young voices stumbled through words, cheering each other's successes and offering gentle corrections for mistakes. These children, orphaned by war, traumatized and displaced, were not cowering in corners waiting to die. They were learning, they were laughing, they were helping each other, because one human woman had decided their lives mattered. Drakmor's talons scraped the stone again, but this time it wasn't from confusion or anger. It was from something he couldn't name, a feeling that made his ancient heart feel strangely full. For the first time in his long life, the Dragon King was witnessing something that impressed him more than military victory or displays of power. He was seeing humanity at its finest. As he remained hidden in the shadows, watching Alara guide the children through their lessons with infinite patience and genuine care, Drakmor realized that his carefully ordered world had just been turned completely upside down. The question now was what he intended to do about it. The lessons continued for another hour, with reading practice followed by basic mathematics and what appeared to be a geography lesson about safe places to find shelter and clean water, practical knowledge that could keep them alive, delivered with the same care as everything else. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade through the high windows, Alara clapped her hands gently. "Time to prepare for evening meal, little ones. Remember your washing up routine?" The children nodded and began organizing themselves with impressive efficiency, older ones helping younger ones, everyone contributing to cleaning up the learning materials and arranging the cushions neatly. "And after dinner?" asked little Mira hopefully. "After dinner, if everyone has done their best today, we'll have story time by the fire." The cheer that went up from the children echoed through the chamber, and Drakmor had to step back deeper into the shadows as several of them ran past his hiding spot, chattering excitedly about which story they hoped to hear. As the throne room emptied and the voices faded down the corridor toward the kitchens, Alara remained behind, straightening the last few items and checking that nothing had been left behind. It was then that she spoke quietly to the empty room. "I know you're there, Your Majesty. You've been standing in that doorway for the past hour." Drakmor's breath caught. Slowly, he stepped into the light, his massive form casting long shadows across the chamber. "How did you know?" Alara turned to face him, showing no fear despite his towering presence. "Dragons breathe steam when they're thinking hard. I could see it rising from the shadows." For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the transformed throne room. Then Drakmor asked the question that burned in his mind. "What have you done to my castle, human?" Alara straightened her shoulders, meeting the Dragon King's golden gaze without flinching. "I've filled it with purpose, Your Majesty." Drakmor's eyes flashed, steam rising from his nostrils. "You dare take such liberties in my absence? These are enemy children, offspring of those who defied my rule." "They are orphans," Alara replied calmly. "Children whose only crime was being born in the wrong place at the wrong time. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Drakmor's voice rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder. "By harboring them, you've committed treason against my crown. The penalty for such defiance is death." Alara nodded slowly. "I know the law, Your Majesty. I also know what I saw when I found them." "Explain." The single word carried the weight of absolute authority, but Alara heard something else beneath it. Curiosity. She gestured toward the cushions where the children had been sitting. 3 days ago, while you were routing the northern clans, your scouts brought news that the fighting had spread to the civilian settlements. Villages were burning, people were fleeing with whatever they could carry. Drakmor's expression remained impassive, but he listened. "I asked Captain Threnix for permission to ride out with the supply wagons heading to your armies. I told him I wanted to gather intelligence on enemy movements." "And did you?" "No, Your Majesty. I lied." Ilara's honesty was startling in its directness. "I went to look for survivors. Specifically, I went looking for children who had been left behind." Drakmor lowered his massive head, bringing his face closer to hers. "Why?" Alara was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of old pain. "Because I was once one of those children, Your Majesty. 15 years ago, when the Southern Rebellion collapsed, I watched my village burn. I hid in a root cellar for 3 days, listening to the sounds of battle above, waiting for someone to come back for me." She moved to one of the windows, looking out over the mountain peaks. "No one ever came. I survived by scavenging, hiding, stealing when I had to. I was 8 years old." Drakmor felt an unexpected pang at her words, but his expression remained stern. Many children have suffered in wars. It does not excuse breaking the laws of hospitality and endangering my household. You're right, Ilara agreed. But let me tell you what I found in those burned villages, and then you can decide if the law was worth breaking. She turned back to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I found Mira first. She was sitting beside her mother's body, trying to wake her up. She'd been there for 2 days, getting weaker and weaker, too young to understand that her mother wasn't sleeping. Drakmore's claws scraped against the stone floor, but he said nothing. Kenna was trapped under the fallen beam of her house, crying for help that never came. Her legs were crushed. I dug her out with my bare hands. Ilara held up her palms, showing fresh scars and calluses. The older boy, Marcus, was trying to keep 6 younger children alive by feeding them bark and muddy water. He was succeeding somehow. How many? Drakmore asked quietly. 23 children in total, ages 4 to 14. Some injured, all traumatized, every one of them facing death by starvation or exposure. Ilara's voice grew stronger. I looked at them, and I had a choice. I could follow the law, report their location to your forces, and let them be processed as enemy dependents. Or you could steal supplies from my stores, commander my castle as a refuge, and hope I wouldn't execute you for it when I returned. Yes. Ilara's answer was simple and unflinching. Drakmore studied her for a long moment. You gambled your life on the hope that I might show mercy to enemy children. No, Your Majesty. Ilara shook her head. I gambled my life on the certainty that leaving children to die slowly was something I could never live with, even if stopping it cost me everything. The distinction hit Drakmore like a physical blow. She hadn't acted in hope of reward or mercy. She had acted because her human conscience demanded it, regardless of consequences. Tell me about the lessons, he said finally. Ilara's expression softened. Most of them couldn't read. In their villages, only the wealthy families could afford education. These were farmers' children, crafters' children, smart, but untaught. And you decided to remedy that. I decided that if they were going to die, at least they could die knowing that someone believed they were worthy of knowledge. Ilara's voice caught slightly. But then something wonderful happened. They didn't just learn, Your Majesty. They thrived. She moved to where Marcus had been sitting earlier. Marcus learned to read in 2 days. 2 days. He has a mind like a blade, sharp and quick. Yesterday he was helping Mira with her letters, and I realized he could be a scholar if given the chance. And the others? Little Kenna, whose legs were crushed, has an incredible memory for stories. She can recite entire tales after hearing them once, and she's been teaching the younger children songs to help them remember their lessons. Ilara's eyes shone with pride. Mira draws pictures to help explain difficult concepts to the others. She's naturally gifted at making complex ideas simple. Drakmore found himself genuinely intrigued despite his anger. They help each other. Constantly. Without being told. The older children naturally protect and teach the younger ones. They share food evenly, even when they're still hungry. When one child has nightmares, the others comfort them. Ilara shook her head in wonder. In 3 days, they've become a family. A family of orphans with no future beyond these walls. Perhaps, Ilara acknowledged. But for 3 days, they've had hope. They've learned that their minds matter, that their lives have value, that they can grow and contribute and belong somewhere. Even if it all ends tomorrow, they've had that. Drakmore began pacing, his massive form moving restlessly around the chamber. You realize the position you've put me in? If word spreads that the Dragon King harbors enemy children, shows weakness toward those who defy him, my rule will be challenged by every ambitious lord with an army. I understand the political implications, Your Majesty. Do you? Drakmor whirled to face her. Do you understand that showing mercy to these children might condemn thousands more to death in the wars that follow? That strength and fear are what maintain the peace in these lands? Ilara considered this carefully before answering. I understand that you believe that, Your Majesty, and maybe you're right, but I also know that strength built only on fear eventually crumbles. True strength comes from having something worth protecting. And what would I be protecting, in your view? The possibility that the children we save today might build a better world tomorrow. Drakmor snorted, steam rising from his nostrils. Idealistic human nonsense. Is it? Ilara challenged. Your Majesty, in your 3 centuries of life, how many problems have you solved through fear alone? More than you could count. How many of those problems stayed solved? Drakmor paused mid-stride. It was a fair question, and he didn't like the answer. The northern clans you just defeated, Ilara continued. How many times have they rebelled? 3? 4? 5, Drakmor admitted grudgingly. Because fear doesn't create loyalty, Your Majesty. It creates resentment that grows until it explodes into rebellion. But what if there was another way? Speak plainly. Ilara gestured toward the doorway through which the children had disappeared. Marcus asked me yesterday why I was helping them. When I told him it was because I believed they mattered, he asked if there were dragons who thought the same way. And what did you tell him? I told him I didn't know, but that I hoped someday he might meet one and find out. Drakmor felt that strange tightness in his chest again. You gave him hope that dragons might show mercy. I gave him a reason to believe that not all powerful beings use their strength to cause suffering. Ilara met his gaze steadily. Imagine if he grows up believing that. Imagine if all of them do. What kind of world might they help create? Or they might grow up to hate dragons for the destruction of their homes and families. They might, Ilara agreed, if their experience of dragon kind begins and ends with violence. But if their first encounter with true dragon power was with a king wise enough to show mercy to the innocent, she let the implication hang in the air. Drakmor found himself thinking about the children's faces as they'd listened to Ilara's lessons. The eagerness to learn, the way they'd helped each other, the genuine affection they'd shown for the woman who had saved them. You're asking me to risk everything on your theory of human nature. No, Your Majesty. Ilara shook her head. I'm asking you to consider that ruling through wisdom instead of fear might be stronger, not weaker. Those children would die for me now, not because they fear me, but because they love me. Which do you think creates more powerful loyalty? Before Drakmor could answer, the sound of small feet echoed through the corridor, accompanied by Marcus's voice calling out urgently. Miss Ilara! Miss Ilara! Kenna's fever is getting worse and Mira can't stop crying. Ilara immediately started toward the door, then paused and looked back at Drakmor. With your permission, Your Majesty? For a moment, Drakmor simply stared at her. She had just confessed to treason, argued with a dragon king about political philosophy, and challenged his most fundamental beliefs about power and governance. Now she was asking permission to comfort a sick child. Go, he said quietly. Ilara nodded and hurried toward the doorway, then stopped again. Your Majesty? The children will be terrified when they realize you're here. Whatever you decide about their fate, could you perhaps wait until morning to announce it? Let them have one more peaceful night? Drakmor watched her disappear down the corridor, her footsteps quick with purpose and care. Then he stood alone in his transformed throne room, surrounded by cushions and learning materials and the lingering warmth of human kindness. For the first time in his long life, the Dragon King wasn't sure what kind of ruler he wanted to be. As evening settled over the castle, Drakmor found himself drawn toward the sounds of quiet activity emanating from the Great Hall. He moved silently through the corridors, his natural stealth allowing him to observe without being detected. The children were gathered around a long table, sharing what appeared to be a simple but hearty meal. Ilara moved between them, checking on Kenna's fever, helping the smallest ones manage their food, listening to excited chatter about the day's lessons. But it was the atmosphere that struck Drakmor most forcefully. Despite their losses, despite their uncertain future, these children radiated a contentment that he had never seen in his own halls. They belonged here, in this moment, with each other. And at the center of it all was Ilara, creating this island of safety and hope through nothing more than her determination to treat them as worthy of care. Drakmor retreated to his private chambers, but sleep eluded him. Instead, he found himself replaying the day's revelations, trying to understand what exactly had changed in his world. Tomorrow, he would have to make a choice that would define not just the fate of 23 orphaned children, but possibly the future of his entire kingdom. The question was, what kind of legacy did the Dragon King want to leave behind? Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the weight of decision. Drakmor had spent the night walking the battlements of his castle, wrestling with thoughts that challenged everything he had built his reign upon. As the first rays of sunlight struck the mountain peaks, he could hear the gentle sounds of the castle awakening below. The children's voices drifted up from the great hall, and he realized they were singing. A simple melody, probably one of the songs Kenna had taught them, but it filled the morning air with something his fortress had never known before: joy. He made his way down to the throne room, where Ilara was already preparing the day's lessons. She looked up as his massive form filled the doorway, her expression calm but alert. "How is the child with the fever?" he asked. "Better, thank you for asking. It broke during the night." Ilara arranged the last of the learning materials. "The children are finishing their breakfast. They'll be here soon." "And they still don't know I've returned?" "I told them you were conducting important business and would meet with them when you were ready." Ilara paused in her work. "I also told them that whatever happens, they should remember that they are valuable and worthy of respect." Drakmor studied her carefully. "You prepared them for the possibility of death." "I prepared them to face whatever comes with dignity." Ilara met his gaze. "It's one of the most important things we can teach children." Before Drakmor could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps filled the corridor. The children were coming, chattering excitedly about the day's lessons, their voices bright with anticipation. "Your Majesty," Ilara said quietly, "whatever you decide, I want you to know that these 3 days have been worth any consequence. They've shown me something I thought I'd lost forever." "Which is?" "Faith in the future." The children entered the throne room in their usual organized fashion, older ones helping younger ones, everyone contributing to the setup of their learning circle. But as they settled onto their cushions, little Mira noticed the enormous shadow in the corner and pointed with a gasp. "Miss Ilara, there's a dragon!" The room fell into absolute silence. 23 pairs of eyes turned toward Drakmor's massive form, and he stepped fully into the light. The reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. Several of the smallest children began crying softly. Others pressed closer to their friends, seeking comfort in numbers. Marcus instinctively moved to shield the younger ones, his thin frame trembling but determined. But not one of them ran. "Children," Ilara said calmly, moving to stand between them and Drakmor, "I'd like you to meet King Drakmor, sovereign of the Eastern Flame Territories. This is his castle, and these are his lands." "Is he going to hurt us?" whispered Kenna, her bandaged legs tucked beneath her. Ilara looked back at Drakmor, her expression making it clear that the next word spoken would determine everything that followed. Drakmor felt the weight of 23 young lives hanging in the balance. In the silence, he could hear his own heartbeat, thunderous and uncertain. These children, these small, fragile beings who had lost everything, were looking at him with terror, but also a strange kind of hope. Because Ilara had told them someone might show them mercy. "I am going to ask you some questions," Drakmor said finally, his deep voice carefully modulated to be as gentle as possible. "Will you answer them honestly?" Marcus stepped forward, still shaking but resolute. "Will you hurt Miss Ilara if we do?" The question caught Drakmor off guard. Even in their fear, their first concern was for the woman who had protected them. "No," Drakmor replied. "Whatever happens, Ilara will not be harmed for your answers." "Then we'll answer," Marcus said, though his voice cracked slightly. Drakmor lowered himself to the floor, bringing his massive head closer to their level. "Why did you come to my castle?" "Miss Ilara saved us," said Mira, wiping her eyes. "Our families were gone, and we were going to die, and she found us and brought us here." "And what have you done while you've been here?" "We've been learning," offered one of the older girls. "Reading and writing and numbers, and we help with chores, and we don't break anything important." "Have you plotted against me? Planned rebellion or escape?" The children looked confused. Marcus spoke for them. "No, sir. We just wanted to learn things and be safe. Miss Ilara said we were safe here." Drakmor turned his attention to Kenna. "Child, you were injured in the fighting. Do you hate dragons for what happened to your village?" Kenna was quiet for a long moment, her young face serious with thought. "I used to," she said finally. "But Miss Ilara said that hating people makes your heart hurt worse than your legs. And she said that maybe someday I might meet dragons who weren't like the scary ones. What would you say to those dragons if you met them?" "I would ask them why they thought hurting people was the right thing to do," Kenna replied with the devastating honesty of childhood. "And then I would tell them about my mama and how she used to sing to me, and maybe they would understand that people aren't just things to be broken." Drakmor felt something shift deep in his chest. "And if they couldn't understand?" "Then I would be sad for them," Kenna said simply. "Because not understanding love must be very lonely." The throne room fell silent again. Drakmor looked around the circle of young faces, seeing not enemies or threats, but children who had been offered hope and had embraced it completely. "Marcus," he said to the older boy, "Ilara tells me you learned to read in 2 days." "Yes, sir. It's not as hard as I thought it would be." "What do you plan to do with that knowledge?" Marcus straightened his shoulders. "I want to learn everything I can, sir. And then I want to teach other children who don't have anyone to help them learn. Like Miss Ilara taught us." "Even dragon children?" The question surprised them all. Marcus glanced at Ilara, then back at Drakmor. "If they wanted to learn, yes, sir. Knowledge should be for everyone who wants it." Drakmor turned to face Ilara, who was watching the exchange with tears streaming silently down her face. "You've taught them well," he said quietly. "They taught themselves, Your Majesty. I just gave them the chance." Drakmor rose to his full height, and the children tensed, but he spoke before fear could take hold. "Children of the burned villages, you have answered my questions with truth and courage. You have shown wisdom beyond your years and hearts large enough to hold hope even in darkness." His voice carried throughout the chamber, formal and final. "I declare you under the protection of the Dragon Crown." The silence stretched for a heartbeat before Marcus found his voice. "Does that mean we can stay?" "It means more than that," Drakmor replied. "It means you are citizens of this realm, with all the rights and protections that status brings. You will be educated, cared for, and when you come of age, you will have choices about your futures that extend far beyond mere survival." Little Mira raised her hand tentatively. "Are you a good dragon, Your Majesty?" Drakmor considered the question seriously. "I am trying to learn how to be one," he said finally. "Your teacher is helping me understand what that means." "Miss Ilara is the best teacher in the world," declared Kenna loyally. "Yes," Drakmor agreed, looking at Ilara with something approaching wonder. "I believe she is." Over the following days, the castle transformed in ways that went far beyond the physical changes Ilara had made. Word spread throughout the kingdom that the Dragon King had taken war orphans under his protection, and the reactions were immediate and varied. Some of Drakmor's military commanders were appalled, warning of weakness and political disaster, but others were intrigued, particularly after they met the children themselves and saw their remarkable progress. Captain Threnix, a grizzled veteran of countless campaigns, found himself teaching Marcus the basics of military strategy after the boy expressed curiosity about how battles were planned. Within a week, Marcus was suggesting tactical improvements that made the seasoned captain reassess his assumptions about human intelligence. The castle's healer discovered that Kenna had an intuitive understanding of herbs and their properties, leading to afternoon sessions where she learned to prepare simple remedies while sharing her vast collection of memorized stories with the medical staff. But perhaps the most significant change came when delegations from other territories arrived to assess this new development in dragon politics. Lord Vorthak of the Western Peaks came expecting to find evidence of weakness he could exploit. Instead, he found himself in a 3-hour discussion with Mira about the principles of fair governance after she politely asked why some dragons thought fear was more important than trust. Lady Silthan of the Southern Reaches arrived, prepared to mock Drakmor's sentimentality, but left pondering the implications of Marcus's question. If strength is supposed to protect people, why do some strong people use it to hurt the very ones they should be protecting? The children's presence became a catalyst for conversations that had never happened before in dragon society. Their questions were innocent but profound, their perspectives untainted by centuries of political tradition. "Your Majesty," Marcus said during one of their evening discussions, "Captain Threnix told me about the northern clans rebelling 5 times. What if, instead of conquering them again, you helped rebuild their villages?" "And why would I do that?" Drakmor asked, though he was already beginning to see the logic. "Because people who have homes and food and safety don't usually want to fight wars. They want to take care of their families and maybe learn new things." Marcus paused thoughtfully. If you help them build something beautiful, they might want to protect it instead of destroy it. The simplicity of the insight was staggering. Drakmor had spent centuries putting down rebellions with force, never considering that addressing the underlying causes might be more effective than simply suppressing the symptoms. As autumn approached, the castle had become something unprecedented in dragon society, a place where ideas were valued as much as strength, where questions were encouraged rather than feared, and where the worth of individuals was measured by their potential rather than their power. Ilara stood in the garden she had helped the children plant, watching them tend to vegetables that would feed the castle through the winter. They moved with purpose and joy, their initial trauma giving way to genuine healing through meaningful work and unconditional care. "You've changed everything," Drakmor said, approaching silently despite his size. "They changed everything," Ilara corrected. "I just gave them the chance to show who they really were." "And what did they show?" Ilara smiled, watching Mira explain plant growth to a fascinated dragon guard who had stopped to ask about her work. "That intelligence is universal. That courage comes in all sizes. And that hope is the most powerful force in any world. The other dragon lords are beginning to ask questions about implementing similar programs in their own territories," Drakmor told her. "Not because they fear my military might, but because they're intrigued by what we've accomplished here. And what have we accomplished? Drakmor was quiet for a moment, watching Marcus teach a group of young dragon nobles the human technique of cooperative problem-solving. We've proven that ruling through wisdom instead of fear doesn't create weakness. It creates something much more valuable, which is a future worth fighting for. As the sun set over the mountain peaks, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the sounds of learning and laughter echoed through the castle corridors. Children's voices mixed with the deeper tones of dragon guards and nobles, all engaged in the ancient human practice of sharing knowledge and building understanding. In his private chambers that night, Drakmor looked out over his kingdom and saw it with new eyes. The villages below were no longer simply territories to be controlled, but communities filled with individuals whose potential remained untapped. The forests and mountains were no longer merely strategic positions, but homes that could be made more beautiful and prosperous with the right care. And in the castle itself, 23 orphaned children slept peacefully, dreaming of the futures they would help create with the education and opportunities they had been given. The Dragon King had come home from battle early and been shocked by his human maid's actions. But perhaps the most shocking discovery of all was that in learning to see the world through human eyes, he had finally learned what it truly meant to be a king. The revolution Ilara had started with her simple act of compassion would spread throughout the dragon territories, carried by the children who had learned that strength and wisdom working together could build something greater than either could achieve alone. And at the center of it all would always be the memory of a human woman who had looked at abandoned children and seen not burdens or enemies, but the architects of a better world. The age of rule through fear was ending. The age of rule through hope had begun.